The Nightmare Before Christmas is usually praised as one of Tim Burton's best movies. But hold on a second, is it really even a Tim Burton movie? That question alone turned its production into a creative battlefield where nobody walked away unscathed. We're not exaggerating. Today we're looking at the clash between a filmmaker forced to hand over his most personal project, another director who poured everything into it but ended up feeling used, a frustrated composer, an angry screenwriter, and a studio that never really understood what it was making, all while the crew relied on an old, uncommercial technique that pushed everyone to their limit. Today, Tim Burton is an icon, responsible for several classics and a Gothic style that still sets trends. But things didn't start that way. In the early 80s, he was just another employee at Walt Disney Feature Animation, a studio going through one of its worst periods. It had no clear direction, and every movie was failing, especially the animated ones. In that depressing, uninspiring environment, Burton was bored out of his mind. The most they gave him were background paintings for films like The Black Cauldron. Even so, his imagination never stopped. He used whatever resources he could to develop a few short films. One of them was Vincent, which he made using stop motion. But what is stop motion? It's an animation technique that creates movement by photographing inanimate objects frame by frame. It rose to fame thanks to masters like Willis O'Brien, the artist behind the original King Kong, and his protege Ray Harryhausen. Over time, it was pushed out of the spotlight by newer effects, but filmmakers like the Czech director Jan Švankmajer kept it alive, using it heavily in Alice. Back to Burton, Vincent and his other shorts didn't spark much enthusiasm at Disney. They were barely screened anywhere. Still, his work connected with co-workers who felt just as lost as he did. Among them was Henry Selick, another stop-motion fan. That support gave Burton enough confidence to try something more ambitious. This time it wouldn't be a short film. It would be a 3-page poem. He poured in his fascination with Halloween, his favorite time of year, and the spirit of Dr. Seuss. He titled it The Nightmare Before Christmas. In just a few verses, Burton introduces Jack Skellington, the leading figure of Halloween Town. His routine changes the moment he steps outside his world and ends up in Christmas Town. He's so amazed by what he finds that he decides to kidnap Santa Claus, take his place, and hand out gifts, the kind of presents he would create. That decision leads straight to trouble, and everything gets worse once Santa is captured by Oogie Boogie, the story's villain. Burton felt good about the poem because it reflected the theme that would eventually define his career. Odd, misunderstood characters trying to survive in worlds that don't know what to do with them. It was the same feeling he dealt with during his time at Disney. Even then, he showed the poem and a few drawings to the studio heads. They rarely cared about his ideas, but he still depended on their resources. At first, he pitched it as a half-hour Christmas special. That didn't land. When he noticed the executives barely flipping through the poem, he pushed past his usual shyness, walked them through the full story, and added that he wanted to make it in stop motion. For a moment, their expressions actually changed. Burton thought they might approve it. They paid attention for a second, then told him no. That was the moment he'd had enough. They had rejected the most personal and imaginative project he'd ever presented. Burton quit Disney, convinced he'd never return. He knew he had the talent and the drive to make it on his own. The studio would never again have the chance to work with him, or at least that's what he believed, until they came back with an offer he couldn't ignore. We'll get to that soon. Once Burton stepped away from Disney, his career took off. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, Batman, and Edward Scissorhands turned him into a major director. He proved he could succeed in Hollywood without abandoning his style, handling big budgets and working with major stars. That made him a magnet for studios, including Disney. By mid-1990, Burton got a call from the studio. A new executive explained that leadership had changed, and Disney had bounced back thanks to hits like Who Framed Roger Rabbit and The Little Mermaid. He also mentioned that they'd gone through old, rejected projects, and one of them was The Nightmare Before Christmas. They didn't just want to revive it as a feature film. They wanted Burton to take it on again, with complete creative freedom. Burton tried to let go of the bitterness and focus on the opportunity. He said he wanted to turn it into a musical made in stop motion, and the executive agreed. For Burton, it felt like a golden chance. He was now a sought-after filmmaker, returning to Disney through the front door to finally make a project he had dreamed about during his toughest years. It sounded like a perfect ending to a long story, except the nightmare was only getting started. Burton wanted The Nightmare Before Christmas to feel like a true event, with music playing a defining role. So he reached out to his most trusted collaborator, and a major player in this story, composer Danny Elfman. Elfman loved the idea. Halloween was his favorite holiday too, and he thought Jack represented it perfectly. Burton also knew he needed a script. While he searched for the right writer, he met with Elfman to start shaping the songs. They understood each other instantly. and shared the same vision for the project. The problem was, neither of them had ever worked on a musical. Burton would toss him loose ideas or a general mood based on the poem, but almost no structure. Sometimes all he handed him was a single line. Elfman had to build from that, far from ideal. Yet he gave it everything he had. One of the story's key moments is when Jack arrives in Christmastown and becomes overwhelmed by its colors. Elfman tried to feel that moment himself, putting himself in Jack's place. That's how he came up with one of the movie's most iconic songs, What's This? Burton loved it, and the two of them gained the confidence to keep pushing forward. Within 2 months, Elfman had 10 songs finished. Burton was finally working on the project he had always wanted to make with his ideal creative partner and Disney's support, something he never imagined years earlier. The studio even approved an $18 million budget, which was generous for an animated film made with a technique most people had written off. But the smooth part didn't last. Before long, the first of many problems appeared. Burton was so absorbed in The Nightmare Before Christmas that he forgot he had already signed a contract with Warner Bros. To direct Batman Returns. He knew perfectly well that an animated project takes years to produce, and Warner didn't want to postpone the sequel to such a successful film. On top of that, they wanted him to start pre-production as soon as possible. For someone as eccentric as Burton, who liked creating worlds at his own pace, being forced to follow Warner's schedule felt like a sentence. But here came the hardest blow. If he wanted to honor that contract, he would have to abandon his project, his golden nightmare, the one place where he could be himself without asking permission. Trying to swallow his frustration, Burton accepted the inevitable. He stepped down from directing The Nightmare Before Christmas, although he managed to stay on as producer and the creator of the story. But that left him with another challenge just as big, finding someone who could direct it without betraying his vision. In Burton's mind, there was only one person who could do it: Henry Selick. Selick had also left Disney to build a career on his own, in his case through commercials and music videos. Burton called him because he remembered him fondly, knew he was talented, and knew he had developed real skill with frame-by-frame animation. Selick also remembered Burton and still liked the poem about Jack. He liked the idea of returning to the studio for such a risky project, and it would be his first chance to direct a feature film. The moment they met for the first time, Burton told him, "You're going to direct my most personal project." Selick agreed, and he liked the songs Elfman was writing. He was fascinated by the idea of a musical that blended Halloween and Christmas, filled with unusual characters and made entirely with stop motion. They were completely in sync, but before the meeting ended, Burton emphasized that he would remain the producer and, listen to this, the conceptual author. Selick agreed again. In fact, he told himself he had no reason to complain. He would direct his first film under the support of the most successful director of the moment. On paper, it worked for everyone, or so he thought. Selick's arrival was approved by Disney's executives, but they still wanted him to show what he planned to do with the material. So he took one of the finished songs, created a storyboard, and animated a few test shots. The studio was impressed, and Burton felt he had made the right choice. But one thing still worried Disney: there was no script. Trying to stay calm, or at least pretend he was, Burton set out to find a screenwriter who could take on a nearly impossible task: build a full story from a poem and a handful of songs. That was all they had. And one rule was absolute: the script couldn't drift from that material or betray the strange, melancholic tone he already envisioned. To anyone around Burton, it seemed obvious he'd call Caroline Thompson. She had written Edward Scissorhands, and at the time, she was dating Elfman. She already knew about the project. She had a great relationship with Burton, and it felt inevitable that she'd get the call any minute. But instead, Burton reached out to Michael McDowell. He had written Beetlejuice and was one of the most respected dark fantasy writers in the industry. Burton and Selick handed him the poem and the songs. Disney trusted him so completely that they paid him up front. They didn't know what he was working on until several weeks later. When Burton and Selick asked if he had something ready, because pre-production needed to start immediately, a frantic McDowell handed them a draft. They began reading and realized he had simply pulled lines from Elfman's lyrics and tried to shape them into something resembling a script. It wasn't usable. Burton was frustrated and even more upset when he discovered McDowell had blown his entire payment on his personal habits. He had no choice but to let him go. If Burton was angry, Disney was losing its patience entirely. By mid-1991, the studio made it clear to him and Selick that they were out of time. Pre-production had to begin immediately, even if Elfman's songs were the only guide they had. So Disney created Skellington Productions, a studio devoted entirely to this film, based in San Francisco. They started hiring animators and began testing early animation, but that still left the script. In the end, Thompson was contacted, not by Burton, but by Disney. She understood it would be like building a house while people were already living inside it, but she accepted the challenge. She liked the story, she'd get to work with Elfman again, and she needed the paycheck. As soon as Thompson began writing, she realized Jack's story already had plenty of shape thanks to the songs, so she turned her attention to Sally, the protagonist's love interest. The character existed in early sketches, but Thompson was inspired by the shape of a matchstick. That helped her build a story around Sally's need for independence and her rebellion against her creator, Dr. Finkelstein. She brought the idea to Burton and Selick. At first, they weren't convinced, and the change meant redesigning the character. With Elfman's support, Thompson eventually persuaded them, even if it required sending Sally back for a full rework. Thompson felt good about that choice, but she also suggested making Sally more active, an anti-heroine who stood on equal footing with Jack. Burton didn't agree. He saw her as delicate, dreamy, and tragic. He also reminded her that pre-production was already moving forward, and Selick was running animation tests. Thompson didn't back down. She pointed out that the ending felt abrupt and didn't complete Sally's arc. Burton snapped, yelled no, and slammed his hand against an editing machine nearby. Thompson realized the stress was catching up with him and decided to let it go. Still, she added a few of her ideas to the ending. She wrote Sally waiting on the spiral hill where Jack arrives and they reconcile. This time he approaches her, instead of the other way around. Burton didn't say anything about the change, maybe because he was overwhelmed with everything else, but it wouldn't be the last conflict over the story. With the script finally underway, pre-production on The Nightmare Before Christmas picked up speed. More storyboards, more sculpted characters, and full sets for Halloween Town and the other worlds. Unfortunately, the problems picked up speed too. During the first days of pre-production, Burton chose the cast who would voice his creatures. For the supporting characters, he brought in actors he had already worked with, like Catherine O'Hara and Paul Reubens. They recorded their parts without any issues. All voices and songs needed to be ready early, so the animators could sync lip movements, gestures, and timing. What remained was choosing Jack's voice. Elfman had already shown he was a charismatic vocalist in his band Oingo Boingo, and he recorded a few demos performing the protagonist's songs. Burton was impressed by how well he conveyed Jack's emotion. That's why he told Elfman he would do the singing in the film, and voice Jack in the scenes where he wasn't singing. Elfman didn't expect that. He had never delivered spoken lines like a trained actor. Even so, he was so committed to the project that he agreed. He recorded his dialogue and trusted Burton and Selick to make it work. Voice recording wrapped by mid-1991, and right when Burton had to step back from the day-to-day work on The Nightmare Before Christmas, Warner called him in for Batman Returns. Before leaving, he told Selick and Disney he'd come back whenever he could to check on his baby. He also reassured Selick he trusted him completely. Selick told him not to worry, but it wouldn't take long for real problems to appear. Full production kicked off in July of 1991. With Burton no longer there day to day, Selick had to take responsibility for the entire film. It was a massive task, but the scale of the opportunity kept him motivated. It became a true test of endurance. Selick had to coordinate 120 animators, each split into teams by character or sequence. They had 230 sets and 227 puppets, including hundreds of interchangeable heads for Jack alone, enough to give him an enormous range of expressions. Jack was also the most complex puppet in the lineup and required the largest team. Burton and Selick had decided he should move like Fred Astaire, and that single choice created a logistical challenge far beyond what the original crew expected. Jack had to move from team to team, which meant every animator needed to keep his gestures and movement perfectly consistent. Selick oversaw everything closely. One mistake could hurt his reputation with Burton, Disney, and the entire industry. Even so, he threw himself into the work, and the results were as precise as he had hoped. By dividing the animators into groups, Selick hoped to speed up a technique that usually demanded endless patience. To give you an idea, after a full week of exhausting, detail-obsessed work, the team could produce 1 minute of animation. And that was considered fast. By the end of 1991, production on The Nightmare Before Christmas was moving slowly, but still making progress. But one question kept coming up: when would Burton return? As promised, he eventually showed up at Skellington Studios. It was obvious how much stress Batman Returns was putting on him. Now he had even less time, because Disney had just approved another project, Ed Wood. Even with his nerves completely worn down, he took a close look at what Selick and the team were doing. He gave a few notes, seemed pleased overall, told Selick he was doing a good job, and left. He would come back only about 5 more times. Selick still understood his role in the project. In his mind, Burton had laid the egg, and he was the one hatching it. That arrangement worked for him. and he felt he was still contributing ideas and momentum. Thompson, however, wasn't nearly as comfortable. She was still working on the script, and during Burton's visit, she brought up something that had been bothering her for weeks. She hated Oogie Boogie. She explained that the character's pointed shape reminded her of something deeply unsettling, that Oogie Boogie had been used in parts of the American South as a dismissive phrase toward black people. She grew up in Maryland, where racial tension was still very present, and it also bothered her that the character was voiced by Ken Page, who is black. Burton, already stretched thin, brushed off her concerns and told her she was being too sensitive. Thompson held herself back, but she wasn't about to quit. She genuinely cared about the movie, and she needed the job. Tension on The Nightmare Before Christmas was becoming impossible to ignore, and soon another conflict erupted, this time involving the film's title character. Elfman felt proud of the songs and of how he had brought Jack to life through them, until April of 1992, when Selick called with bad news. He told him Jack's spoken dialogue sounded too soft, not clear or powerful enough to sync cleanly with the animation. Elfman didn't see it that way. So during one of Burton's rare visits, he asked for his opinion. Burton, more stressed than ever, reviewed the tests and agreed with Selick. Elfman couldn't hide his frustration, but eventually accepted the decision for the sake of the film. That left a huge question. Who could replace him this late in production? They needed someone whose voice matched Elfman's singing, and who could record lines with precise direction while the animation was already underway. Burton and Selick held a quick audition process, and soon they found Chris Sarandon. He was already a respected actor with a strong track record, a memorable presence, and a speaking voice surprisingly close to Elfman's. Burton, Selick, and Disney ran a session where they played him Danny's recordings and showed a few clips. The moment he delivered the first line, the room lit up. He didn't just sound similar. He captured Jack's gentle, excited, slightly offbeat tone perfectly. Burton wished him luck and headed back to his other films, hoping this would be the last crisis he'd have to deal with. Selick began working with Sarandon in April of 1992. One day, the actor was flown from Los Angeles to San Francisco, where he spent about 5 hours recording. Selick had a clear idea of what he wanted, but he often let Sarandon try 3 different approaches to the same line. Later, he'd choose the version that fit the scene best. When the session ended, the actor was put back on a plane and sent home. For the next 3 months, the animators focused entirely on Jack, adjusting every lip movement to match Sarandon's dialogue. Then the actor was flown back to repeat the process. That cycle continued until October of 1992, when production finally came to an end. After 18 months of precision, patience, and constant pressure, the animation for The Nightmare Before Christmas was finished. The team had captured 109,440 individual frames. The next step was assembling every scene in post-production, a stage that demanded just as much care. This time, Burton would be far more involved. But here's the twist. Things were about to get even more complicated. Because it was an animated film, The Nightmare Before Christmas had a post-production schedule planned down to the last detail. Selick had extremely precise storyboards, so nothing slipped out of place. But that didn't mean everything went smoothly. The problems just took a different form. Burton could finally see how his long-awaited project was coming together, and he felt it could be better. He reviewed the edit several times and requested adjustments to the artwork. He loved how consistent Jack's voice felt, yet he still thought the dialogue needed refining. He brought Sarandon back for more sessions in 1993. Selick agreed with the changes, and he didn't want to push back. Burton's stress from Batman Returns was impossible to miss. And what's the worst thing that can happen to someone who's already burned out? Running into someone else in the exact same state. And that was Elfman. Both had just come off the post-production chaos of the Batman sequel, where Warner had pushed Elfman to the limit as well. He felt Burton had never backed him, and sometimes barely even spoke to him. Truthfully, he had been frustrated since the beginning of The Nightmare Before Christmas. He hated having to craft songs from a single line, and then watched his spoken dialogue get replaced. So when Burton called him in before the final mix to adjust a few details, Elfman finally snapped. Trying to stay civil, he told Burton he didn't feel valued, and was tired of working in a void. Burton responded that Elfman refused to accept directorial decisions. The argument escalated quickly, each accusing the other of not offering enough recognition. After unloading years of pent-up frustration, Elfman stormed out of the post-production room and slammed the door. Selick and the Disney executives were stunned. None of them had ever seen either man reach that level of anger. In the middle of that tense environment, Burton attended a meeting called by Disney's top executives. After watching an early cut, they admitted they didn't know how to feel about it. The movie seemed too dark for children, so they decided it would be released under Touchstone Pictures, the studio's label for films aimed at a different audience. They had done the same thing with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and it had paid off. In that same meeting, Burton learned about another decision. Since the studio wasn't sure whether to market the film directly to kids, they cut the promotional budget. Instead, they planned to target Burton's fan base, which meant the film would be titled Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Burton didn't mind. After all, he had created the idea, but Selick strongly disagreed. To him, the title made it sound like Burton had actually directed the movie, when in reality, he had only visited the set a few times. It felt unfair, and it wasn't what they had discussed when he joined the project. He told Burton he had nothing against him, that he understood he was the original creator, but he reminded him that he and his team were the ones who brought the film to life. The executives said they valued his work, but stressed that the choice was a marketing strategy. They added that his name would appear in the credits, as it should, even if this is how it ended up looking. Selick didn't have many options. He accepted it, though he didn't like it at all. The Nightmare Before Christmas had already become a breeding ground for conflict, and it still wasn't even out in theaters. The Nightmare Before Christmas premiered on October 9, 1993, at the New York Film Festival. As expected, Tim Burton's name alone packed the theater. But when the screening ended, the audience didn't know what to make of it. It didn't feel like a movie for kids, but it didn't feel like one for adults either. Disney took note of that reaction before the commercial rollout. The film had a limited release on October 13th, so the studio could gauge the response. Theater after theater echoed what had happened in New York. People were unsure how to react. Then came the wide release on October 29th. It was Halloween season, so Disney hoped it would appeal to fans of the unusual and the eerie. The strategy worked, but only to a certain degree. Critics praised the film's originality and the artistry behind the stop motion. Audiences, however, weren't nearly as enthusiastic. The movie grossed $109 million against an $18 million budget, technically a success. But Disney considered it a letdown. With Tim Burton's name on it, the studio's new good luck charm, they expected a far bigger hit. After years of intense work, The Nightmare Before Christmas seemed to fall short. And to make things worse, its key creators weren't even on speaking terms. For a moment, it felt like the end of a project that had once excited everyone involved. By 1994, everyone involved had moved on to new work. Burton released Ed Wood, this time teaming up with a different composer, Howard Shore. Elfman started collaborating with other directors. Thompson focused on directing her own scripts. Selick began developing projects where his contribution wouldn't be overshadowed. And Disney kept operating like the powerhouse it was, delivering hit after hit during its new golden era. That same year, The Nightmare Before Christmas began to build a life of its own. Its home video release allowed it to reach a broader, more receptive audience, kids with unusual tastes, college students, and fans of more offbeat storytelling. That's where the cult following started. Disney didn't ignore the growing interest. The studio expanded the merchandise line, and when the sales turned out to be huge, they paid even closer attention to what the film was becoming. The songs were catching on, and Jack Skellington quickly turned into a goth pop icon. In 2001, the movie arrived on DVD with a long list of bonus features. And this time, Disney didn't hide it under another label. The film carried the Disney name front and center. Jack's resurgence also affected the people behind the film. In early 1996, Elfman walked into a cafe in Kansas, near where Burton was filming Mars Attacks. They had planned to meet there. The moment they saw each other, they simply hugged and said, "Forget it." Not only did they reconcile, they also started working together again. For Elfman, who had taken the tension the hardest, it felt like a relationship that needed space and came back stronger. Burton eventually made peace with Selick. They talked things out and even reunited on another project, James and the Giant Peach. Selick directed while Burton produced, though this time he stayed much more in the background. The reconciliation between Burton and Thompson seemed far less likely. She still disagreed with several creative choices in The Nightmare Before Christmas, and for years she avoided watching the movie altogether. Even so, she continued to admire Burton as both an artist and a person. She realized the feeling was mutual when he called her to write the script for Corpse Bride, another stop-motion film, one Burton directed, or rather co-directed, with animator Mike Johnson. This saga of hard work, tension, breakthroughs, and puppets could have ended there, wrapped up with a happy resolution. But there was one more chapter. In 2009, Selick released Coraline, a film that quickly developed its own cult following. To promote it, Universal Pictures added a line in the trailer from the director of The Nightmare Before Christmas. It wasn't technically untrue, but in the eyes of most people, the director of that movie had always been Tim Burton. And since Coraline was another dark stop-motion film, audiences immediately assumed it was Burton's latest work. Tired of the confusion, Selick spoke up. He made it clear that Coraline was his movie, criticized the misleading marketing, and admitted how much it frustrates him that so many of his films are mistaken for Burton's. The Nightmare Before Christmas began as a poem from a rising artist but turned into a difficult, chaotic production. It brought together incredible talent, yet the process pushed everyone to their limits. And the studio wasn't much help either. Even so, the movie that emerged carried Jack's own spirit. Strange, magnetic, misunderstood at first, and eventually loved by millions. So tell me, is it a Halloween movie? A Christmas movie? And who do you think is the real author behind it? Let me know in the comments. Imagine wanting to make the most personal movie of your life, but you're such a perfectionist that you spend decades on it, and somehow it still isn't enough.